Good morning, everybody. Today is the 10th of September, so we're ready again for another 1010 webinar. This time, this webinar will talk about or present you the changes introduced in the CEN and CENELEC bylaws. My name is Els, and as usual, I will be moderating the webinar in the background together with my colleague Ines, who is working in the Director General's office. I would like to remind you that all attendees are muted today, so you do not have the possibility to raise your questions right away, but we do invite you to enter your questions in the Q&A panel of this webinar. Elena is the speaker and she's able to see all your questions coming in, but we do want to highlight that we have 30 minutes of presentation. So should your question remain unreplied today during the webinar, please don't worry, because we intend to create a Q&A report that we make available on the website later. So please use the Q&A panel for entering the questions. So I'm very happy today that I have the honor and the pleasure to present the speaker we have today for this webinar, our Director General of CEN and CENELEC, Elena Santiago Cid. Good morning, Elena, and thank you for being here with us. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Els. The pleasure is mine. I think that we don't find so many opportunities to meet and to have a little exchange about the progress that is made in the governance and by the governing bodies of CEN and CENELEC. So it's a great opportunity to get to understand a little bit better how we work, what are the motivations for the changes that we have, and what is the real reason that drove CEN and CENELEC to move to these changes. So I would like to start by the strategic reasons and the political scenarios in which we decided to move on and to revise the bylaws. And just to say that bylaws is an American terminology, that is not the right wording in European English, but we felt that it could just reduce the number of words instead of saying statutes and internal regulations. So political context, I think that you all know how the evolution of Brexit and the different time frames that we had, and the delays integrated on the transitional period. So there was finally the political context in which January 2020 UK left the European Union. And we really had, after several transition periods for BSI as a member, that the first one was taken in November 2018, it was important to attack the governance and the membership requirements, but at the same time to give a very strong signal that the European standardization system was going to be robust after this political change, and to continue engaging our industry stakeholders, all those experts that are working in the standards development process, and using the standards so that there was no legal uncertainty on how the standards had been approved and how the governance had been taking decisions within CEN and CENELEC. Also, in this context, and I think that was very timely, we were developing the new strategy 2030 that is is giving us actually a 10 years term view on the where CEN and CENELEC want to be, and what are the steps that we're going to take in order to get there. And we can say that the revision of the bylaws took place focusing on 3 major strategic goals out of the 5 that we have. The first one is that the EU and EFTA recognize the use and the strategic value of the system. That was extremely important because, as you know, there is 20% of the collection of the CEN and CENELEC standards that are supporting European policies and legislation. So actually that recognition could not be put at risk in this with this exercise. The second one was that we had to continue being the preferred choice for standardization in Europe, and that relates also to the involvement and engagement of the relevant actors in the standards making process, and keeping them motivated, and also giving them a return on investment for what they are doing. And finally, and also very important, is that in this exercise, we could not miss the international dimension, and the statutes could not undermine the importance and the willingness to strengthen and lead the international standardization. So what do we mean by the bylaws? Because again, I said that was a terminology that we have been using all along the exercise, but actually these are the rules for the association to operate. And these are the CEN statutes and the CENELEC statutes. And those, the current ones that you can find on the CEN and CENELEC website, I just take the opportunity to announce the new CEN and CENELEC website, but they can be found, the old ones, in the BOS of CEN and CENELEC under reference material, and the new ones that will be actually in place from the 1st of January 2021, you can find them from January 2021. But these statutes, which are high-level description of the rules of the associations, are also detailing implementation or complemented by the internal regulations. So the part that we have attacked very much during this exercise have been the internal regulations part 1, that speaks about organization and structure for CEN and CENELEC, and it has actually 4 parts, A, B, C, and D. Part 1A relates to CEN only, part 1B relates to CENELEC only, part 1C and D relates to CEN and CENELEC as joint governance and also common membership criteria for both organizations. Part 2, I think that is very well known for all those that are working in the technical committees and in the technical work. These are the common rules for standardization work. Extremely important in order to understand the standards making process, and it is currently under revision because we decided to revise part 1 first, and then to continue with the consistent documentation and introduce relevant changes in the part 2, together with the annual changes that are introduced in the internal regulations part 2. And then, of course, we have got part 3 that relates to the rules for the structure and the drafting, also extremely important for the technical committee secretaries and experts, and part 4 that deals with the certification, that has had also some evolution during the last year, but we will not elaborate on that. So today we are focusing on the statutes and the internal regulations part 1. What was the objective at the end of the day of revising the bylaws? First of all, to ensure the robustness of the system after Brexit. That has been a very, very, very significant hiccup for Europe, and we were fully embedded in these discussions. So, as I mentioned before, for us it was extremely important that our system keeps robust, future-proof, and that we can accommodate future developments without altering or jeopardizing the effects that we want to create and the impact that we want to create in the market. I already mentioned that it was important to keep industry and society engaged. Also, it is very important that we strengthen the single market, that we contribute to the reciprocity in the market access. I mentioned international standardization. There is a lot to say about that in the strategy 2030. The leadership, the European leadership within the ISO and IC networks. And in this case, as you may know, BSI has got a very important role in leading specific technical committees at international level. So this was something that we wanted to build on the strengths of our network, and also at the same time to make sure that Europe continues to be safe, thanks to European standards, sustainable, and certainly to promote competitiveness. And without jeopardizing the recognition of a European standard organization that, as is described in Regulation 1025, where we also share European values. So we have tried to simplify the exercise. And I'm going to start by addressing the new membership definition and requirements that are included in the statutes and the internal regulations, and in particular in the part 1D that speaks about membership requirements. First of all, this is something that has not changed. In our association, CEN and CENELEC, there can only be one member per country. If it is CEN, it's a national standard body. If it is CENELEC, it's a national committee. Second, again, something that has not changed, but has been made clearer in the bylaws, in the rules for the association. It is compulsory to adopt at national level all European standards and to withdraw national conflicting standards. This is extremely important to support the single market. Another one is our strong commitment with ISO and IEC. So our members have to be a member, full or correspondence. So we have actually made that distinction that exists in ISO and in IEC. Of ISO in the case of CEN members, of full or associate in the case of the CENELEC members. And of course, it's something that has not changed either, but again has been made clearer in the statutes of CEN and CENELEC. Those need to adhere and abide to the standardization principles that are described in the World Trade Organization, in particular in the TBT, in the annex that speaks about the good practices for European and for standards organizations. And here it comes the big effort that has been made by the CEN and CENELEC community, that is the description of the members and the establishment of 3 types of members within the CEN and CENELEC community. First of all, and of course, this is cumulative. So this is not or, it's and. These are all the criteria that must be fulfilled. So it has to be a national standard body that is established in a European state. And we took that definition actually from the Treaty of the Union. There is Article 49 that refers to European states. And that European state need to have relations with the European Economic Area. And here we wanted to emphasize the role of CEN and CENELEC in supporting the single market, defining 3 types of possibilities to be a member of CEN and CENELEC. Blue type members, it is very straightforward. Those are national standards bodies or committees that are established in the European Economic Area. So in one of the European states that are in the European Economic Area states. The second type, red type members, are all those national standards bodies or national committees that come from a EFTA state that is not a blue type member. And I think we all know that today we are referring to Switzerland, or from states that are officially identified as candidate countries for accession to the Union. And there is an official list, you can find that in the European Commission website, where they defined what is a candidate country and what are the candidate countries to the European Union. And finally, we have yellow type members that are those national standards bodies or national committees that are established in a state that first have an agreement with the European Union, that demonstrate regulatory convergence or compatibility with the essential regulations that support the single market in those areas that are relevant to CEN and CENELEC activities. And this is extremely consistent with the requirement to adopt all European standards at national level and to withdraw all conflicting standards at national level. So just to give you a visual, this is how the CEN and CENELEC geographical map will look like from the 1st of January 2022, provided that, of course, BSI is agreed as a yellow type member from in the November General Assembly, because currently, and I will explain that now, we are following the process, and the AD took a decision to proceed with these requirements for the assessment of BSI, and to have a report of the audit available for decision in the General Assembly in November. Now, Impact on technical rights and obligations. There has been no modifications in the rights and obligations from a technical point of view. For the three types of members, the obligation to adopt European standards and to withdraw national conflicting standards remain unchanged. They will all have the right to vote on European standards, and that includes, of course, harmonized standards, because in the evolution of the standards making process, we don't make a distinction between harmonized and non-harmonized. What I think is very important is to remind that according to our current rules, we have got a double counting when the vote is negative, and there is a second counting with the NSBs, NCs that come from EEA, so what we call blue type members, and if the result is positive, the standard is approved. But there is no change in the right to vote. There is no change either in the right to vote on a standardization request. And again, we follow exactly the same approach as we do for the approval of the European standards. There is an obligation to notify a deviations, that are all those deviations that relate to national legislation that hamper the application of the European standard at national level. And that is extremely important also because we are having discussions with the Commission in notifying the list of the deviations for the single market scoreboard. It is outside the competence of CEN and CENELEC to ask a member state to change the legislation to ensure free circulation of goods, but we can inform the European Commission that there is a national legislation that is jeopardizing the free circulation of goods according to the single market rules. And finally, there is no change in the right to hold secretariats or chairpersonships in the technical bodies. Where we did introduce some changes were in the monitoring, in the way that we are going to follow up on the aspects of the European standardization that support the single market. So there have been several measures that have been taken, and these are also included and will be covered in the revision of the internal regulation part 2 that strengthen the monitoring. First of all, there is an additional criteria for the qualitative assessment of the aid deviations, and the one that I mentioned that is related to the national legislation. And this is going to lead to the development of the monitoring mechanism that will be given to them. In this passage is being given to the technical boards, where the monitoring mechanisms that include a series of information. So it should have the number of aid deviations over the catalog, both ENs and harmonized standards, also the number of aid deviations per member, also the number of aid deviations per piece of legislation, because it also has a sectoral dimension, and also per piece of legislation and member. So these were some elements that were considered essential for the monitoring mechanism prior to introduce any kind of threshold to the number of aid deviations that are going to be allowed or not. And based on this information and on this monitoring, further decisions could be taken. Also, it's very important that the candidate organization demonstrate that the national regulatory framework is convergent or compatible with the essential regulations that support the single market. And that comes absolutely from the definition of the red type membership, because for the blue and the yellow type membership, from the blue there is total harmonization in Europe. For the yellow, there is a clear intention of the country to harmonize with the European legislation. For the red, there must be a demonstration that there is convergent or compatible legislation, so that there are no technical barriers to trade, and then we achieve the objectives that are actually the main ones for the standardization activities. And something that is also important is that that country needs to have an agreement that with the EU that includes a dispute settlement mechanism that covers technical barriers to trade. Of course, this would be a very high level arrangement, However, it is important that we have the possibility to bring some of the technical aspects to our legislators and policymakers and those that have actually a trade commitment to address any of the issues that we may have in order to follow the WTO activity principles of non-technical barriers to trade. Okay, and I see that there is someone that someone said, what is meant by reciprocity in market access? That is Jorgen Wiki. I think that I can try to answer that, but as you know, when we publish a European standard, we have, all the members have the obligation to adopt the European standard and to withdraw national conflicting standards. And this means that if you are going to place a product in the market that is fulfilling the requirements of the standard, this product should be placed in all the countries that are members of CEN and CENELEC. So this is what we mean by reciprocity in market access. So if you can place your product in a market, that country also can place the product in your market. And harmonized standards and European standards have the objective to achieve that in those areas that are covered by our standards. So yes, I thought it was important to address that. We have also introduced some modifications in the governance, rights and obligations. I will try to be brief because we don't have much time, but this has been not an easy task, I must say. Hence, we have now established a new criteria to become a member of the CEN and CENELEC board. So today we have two criteria. In the case of CEN, financial and technical. In the case of CENELEC, we have got only one criteria, that is financial, and each member has got 13 board members, 13 CEN and 13 CENELEC. And the groups are established in 4 categories in CENELEC and in 3 in CEN. I will not go into the details of that, but the change that we have introduced is that now to be an A group member in the CEN and CENELEC, the criteria is that member need to come from an EEA country. So if you are an EEA country member, then you can access the group A that has got a permanent position in the board. If not, then the process is election, as it is currently today for the B, C, and BCD in CENELEC. And this is why we said permanent position if you are an A member, and for the rest is elected position. And this is the change that has been introduced for the red type members in particular. Then we have got we have established a transitional period for the eligibility criteria of officers, so presidents, vice presidents, and membership relations and monitoring committee chair. This is a 5 years transition for the yellow type members. It means that before you can apply as a candidate for the position, the member have to be in that category for 5 years. And another modification that has been introduced is the membership assessment. So today we have got in place a very, very well-functioning membership assessment system that the members have got the option to choose between peer assessment or self-assessment. So all the criteria that are described in the internal regulations part 1D are assessed always by a third party. So it can be a peer assessor, or it can be a member making the assessment, but validated somehow through the ISO 9000 certificate. And for the yellow type member, precisely for the reasoning that I mentioned before, that for the blue and the yellow, there is a clear understanding that there is legislative convergence or total harmonization. There is important to monitor that there is no deviations in the fulfillment of the criteria. So there is a peer assessment, and this is something that will happen every year. And every 3rd year, there will be an external assessment, and that will be done by a team that also includes a legal advisor, so that we can have a clear picture of what is the situation in the country, what is the framework, and if it allows to continue filling the requirements that are requested for the CEN and CENELEC members in that category. Also important to mention that we have introduced an appeal mechanism that we had one that was already described in the internal regulations part 2, but that was mainly for technical decisions, and it was felt that there was a gap in our governance. So there is now a very comprehensive mechanism that addresses governance and technical decisions. And any member, and this is restricted to members, but also to those partners organizations that have contributed to the technical work, can appeal to a decision taken by one of the bodies that you can see on the slide, technical bodies, the CEN and CENELEC technical bodies, and there is a difference here because it's not the same to have a single technical body because the reporting lines are different, for a joint governing body, as it is the case in the presidential committee. And you see here that there is a little bit of a difference for the CEN and CENELEC appeals to the technical board, but the rest is very homogeneous. So for appeal to a decision of a technical body, the appeal goes to the BT. For a joint technical body, in the case of agreement between the two BTs, the decision is final, but it's not. If not, it goes to the PC. An appeal to a technical board decision go to the CEN-CA or to the CENELEC AG, depending on where the technical body is established. An appeal to the administrative board, the General Assembly. An appeal to the Presidential Committee will require the establishment of a Board of Appeal between CEN and CENELEC General Assemblies, and an appeal to the General Assembly is not possible. The member will have to go to the board, and the decision of the appeal is final. And this is very well described now in the internal regulations part 1A, 1B, and 1C, depending on the body in which the appeal wants to be made. So something that I mentioned before, that we have really strengthened the monitoring of the impact of the standards in the single market, but also we are stronger in the definition of what happens when a member doesn't fulfill the obligations. And it's written black and white in the statutes and the internal regulations that the CEN and CENELEC members must fulfill the obligations at all times. It's not that when they become members, they fulfill the obligations and then there is a relaxation. And this is the case and all the time. And we have this demonstration through the membership relations and monitoring committee and the assessments, but we did not have a detailed description of what happens when a member does not fulfill the membership obligations or commit a serious breach of those obligations. So now there is a very clear process that implies an evaluation of our specific committee established for that, that stipulates the degree of non-conformity. And of course, this degree of non-conformity is very much related to the membership criteria that I have described at the very beginning for the different type of members. And in case of serious non-conformity and not taking any action in order to remediate those non-conformities, that will be the beginning of escalation procedure that is very, very detailed, described in the internal regulation part 1D and is referred to in the statutes. And if in the end of these calls there is no remedy, then there will be a procedure that will be triggered by the boards of CEN or CENELEC, and it can lead to expelling the member from the membership of CEN and CENELEC. And the majority required is 2/3 majority. And that includes also the date of effect. So next steps is that the CEN and CENELEC AGs decide on the BSI's membership statutes from 2022, because as I mentioned at the beginning, there was a transition period granted until the end of 2021. And the assessment process has taken place during this summer break according to the new requirements, even if they are not applicable until the 1st of January. There was a specific decision taken by the General Assembly that the assessment had to be made according to the new requirements. And as I said, the revised statutes would start to be into application from the 1st of January, except for the composition of the boards. And this is also a question of ensuring a smooth transition in the boards of CEN and CENELEC. So the new CA compositions will be in place from the 1st of January 2023. And with that, just to say that we do believe that with these changes in the statutes and general regulations, we ensure the robustness of the system. We create certainty for the standards makers and the standards users. There is no impact on the technical rights and obligations, but we have adapted the governance rights and obligations and the monitoring mechanism to make sure that we keep the impact that we want to keep of our standards to support the market, and also that all our members fulfill the criteria as they are supposed to, and they are committed to fulfill. And